So our second reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 51 through 62. And these are some of the harder stories of Jesus. I'll just give you that. When the days drew near for Jesus to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him. And on their way, they entered a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. But the Samaritans did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and then they went on to another village. And as they were going along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And to another one he said, "Follow me." But the man said, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." And another one said, "I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my home." And Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, it is good to be back with you this morning. I know I've been around churches and long enough to know that people talk about you when you miss too much. And one of the things that people say is the best way to get someone to come back into church is to give them a job to do. And so I think maybe that's why Mike invited me to come preach this morning while he's on vacation. I have missed a lot lately. As I hope you know, I'm a candidate for ministry in the Presbyterian Church, and so I'm in transition from being a member, like all of us, of this congregation, to serving a church. And I've been working with Westover Hills Presbyterian Church in Little Rock on a part-time internship basis. So it's a transition, but right now I'm there more than I am here. But I bring greetings from Westover Hills. And I'll say also I had a chance to preach at Trinity Presbyterian last month, and so I bring greetings from Trinity Presbyterian Church, because that's one of the best things about being Presbyterian is our connection with other congregations. We are way bigger than we look like when we just look around this room. Another gift that we have is the lectionary. And, all gifts that come from God are good, and all God's gifts are good. And so we have to say our lectionary is good, that comes from God, our readings. So I'm saying up front that that's not necessarily one I would choose this morning, but that's what we've been given, and so that's what we work with. The lectionary does provide this systematic reading of the Bible. It takes about 3 years to go through the whole thing. It doesn't have all of the scriptures in there, but it has most of it. And that's where that's where I got these this morning. So that's why we had that great Old Testament story about the prophet Elijah and Elisha. And, it's a good summertime story to hear these old stories sometimes. I'll be honest one more time and tell you the best comment I found on today's readings was, "Have compassion on the preacher who is used to weaving a soothing and comforting message from the scriptures," because that is not what we have this morning. So there you have it. There's no more surprises in store for you. We have the saga of Elijah, one of the major Old Testament prophets, as he prepares to be taken up to heaven. So Elijah is accompanied on this journey by his disciple Elisha. Elisha came from a very rich family. He lived with his parents when Elijah found him. He was plowing a field with 12 sets of oxen. It tells you right there, doesn't it? God directed Elijah to anoint Elisha to to take his place during a particularly trying time. So it seems that they are both very aware of what is going to take place here. So here's some of the intervening verses that were skipped. It's appropriate that this story starts at a place called Gilgal. It's called a place of beginning. The Hebrews celebrated the first Passover in the Promised Land there at Gilgal. And Elijah tells Elisha to stay, but Elisha won't have it. So then they proceed to Bethel, the house of God, a place of dreams, where Jacob met God in a dream. Sometimes you can remember these stories. And again, Elijah tells Elisha to stay put. And again, Elisha refuses, and they proceed on to Jericho. This is a place of victory, a border town. Beyond Jericho is the wilderness. And one final time, Elijah tells Elisha to stay while he continues his journey alone. And obviously, Elisha refuses. So then when they come to the Jordan River, Elijah struck the water with his mantle, the water separated, and the two prophets crossed on dry ground. So 3 times here, Elijah tells Elisha to stay, and 3 times Elisha refuses. At each place, they're met by local prophets who try to talk Elisha out of going any further. Why are you still following that old man, they ask. Won't you know he's finished? He's used up. He's done. God's through with him. But Elisha won't have their comments, and he tells them to be silent. And after they cross the Jordan River, then Elisha has his chance to make his request. This is what he's come for. What do you want anyway? Elijah asks him. Tell me what I can do for you. And Elisha says, I want what you have. He says, I want the Spirit of God that rests on you. In fact, I want a double portion. And it sounds greedy. It sounds like those kids that want a cookie for every hand and then one more that as many as they can hold. But Elisha is well aware of inheritance, and he wants the rights of the eldest son, the right of the firstborn. There's trouble brewing in this community, and he wants all the help that he can get. So if there's any greed here, he's greedy for God. He has a big job ahead of him, and he knows it, and he wants all the help that he can get. But Elijah realizes that Elisha has asked for something that he can't give. You've asked for something hard, he says. It isn't up to me. But here's what we'll do. Here's what to do. You keep watching. If you see me taken up, then you'll get what you ask. And if you don't, you won't. There you have it. It's as if he has to win a staring contest. If you can keep your eyes on it, you'll get it. If he's to inherit the Spirit, and not only that, but the double portion that he's requested, he's got to claim that whole thing. There's no partial here, no little bits here. It's all or nothing. So Elijah, in doing that, passed the baton on to the next generation. And he was taken up in a whirlwind. And we know all about whirlwinds here in Arkansas and in Oklahoma, where I came from. So we know about this taken up in the whirlwind. So as Elijah passed that mantle to the next generation in Elisha, so did Jesus pass it on to his disciples and to us as his disciples also. So in our gospel story in Luke now, Jesus' face is set toward Jerusalem, it says. And there's a sternness, a harshness about him. He's not fooling around here. When that Samaritan village rejected him, he kept on going. I mean, he wouldn't let James and John call down thunder and burn it up. He was not going to be distracted with those kind of drama and theatrics. He kept on going. When someone said, I will follow you, he said, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. We have work to do, he's saying. This isn't summer vacation. We're not going on a little mission trip to do our job and then come back home again. This is real. And then he became really harsh, it seems. He called someone else to follow him. And the man said, sure, but let me go and bury my father. Of all excuses, of all reasons that would be legitimate, This is honor your father and mother as we are called to do in those commandments. But Jesus replied, no. He said, let the dead bury their own dead. It's like, ouch. And another one said, the last one said, I'll come, but let me just go say goodbye to those at home, to my family. And what does Jesus say to that one? He says, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Yes, please do have compassion for the preacher trying to weave a comforting, soothing sermon out of these passages. Not going to be there. But though these may not be soothing in that regard, they may be more helpful and more soothing in another way because they are realistic. Following Jesus really isn't for the faint at heart. It's wonderful to come here this morning. We have glorious music and incredibly beautiful stained glass windows that we've just heard the stories of. I love it. We have the deep friendships that we experience, the growing friendships and deepening friendships that we have when we come together here. I love it and I miss it when I'm not here. But being called in here to this gathering is only part of God's call to us. At some point, we go back out again. We go back out into the world where life can be harsh, where great injustices are worked against people because of their skin color or because of their poverty or sexual orientation or immigration status, or for a host of other reasons. You know all these things that are going on in the world. You don't need me to remind you of the unrest that lies just outside these walls, that sometimes creeps inside these walls, the divisiveness and fear and hate that seems ready to erupt at any time. This room is a sanctuary for a very good reason. We are called in to be safe, secure for the moment, to be fed and nourished and nurtured and grow in our spiritual connection with God. We're called in for all of this. But as we don't stay here, and as surely as God calls us in here this morning, God calls us to go back out at 11:30. Outside is where we live into our name as disciples, as followers of Jesus. This is where, outside is where we follow Jesus' path with the hungry and the sick and the captives and the sojourners, feeding and healing and visiting and welcoming. And activism is part of discipleship. Think about it. It is inconceivable, it is unthinkable that God would create a world marked by injustice and brutality and alienation and violence. Where these circumstances exist, we may be sure that they conflict with God's intention for the world that was created good. You with me there? It is easy to get distracted and to think that as long as something doesn't affect us directly, then those injustices don't really apply to us, and maybe we aren't responsible. But it isn't so. You know, we're preparing to celebrate our grand national holiday this week, Independence Day, the day we celebrate the freedoms that were so hard fought for and so hard to win. And many of you probably went to Beaver Fork last night for the celebration with fireworks, and they were grand. These are glorious displays. The holiday is big enough to last all week. There will be fireworks and picnics and feasts, and I don't know what all there will be to celebrate at different parks and places around in central Arkansas. But even as we celebrate, we know that there are those whose freedom came late, and we know that there are those who are not free. Last Thursday, I was helping in a literacy class in the Pulaski County Detention Center in Little Rock. And we had a vocabulary lesson. And one of the men said that he really liked vocabulary lessons. And I'm looking around, really? Nobody likes vocabulary lessons. He said yes. He said he needed words. He had stories to tell, and he was hungry for words. And it's like, oh man, how many of us grew up with books around us all around, and we have words and have never been hungry for words. We've been hungry for other things, but for words, no. We had a little party. No, we had snacks after the vocabulary lesson. And the woman that I was teaching with had brought cookies. She brought red, white, and blue cookies. And we'd brought extra books because the class would not meet on the following this Thursday because it's Independence Day. It's a day to celebrate freedom and liberty. And it's like, ouch. How do you say that to these people who are not experiencing it? And I'm not saying anything at all about deservingness or worthiness or what they did or what they didn't do. But the fact is that they are not celebrating liberty this Thursday. So following Jesus' path, proclaiming good news, it's inconvenient sometimes to see differently. It's inconvenient to live differently, and it can be dangerous. We know stories of biblical figures and of people throughout the years. You know, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, or Dietrich Bonhoeffer come to mind sometimes. They have suffered and been killed for their prophetic witness. And people today also risk their safety and their comfort by serving as accompaniers. And I actually had this before I went to Sunday school this morning, Sue. So I am going to raise you up and mention you that you have done this, risking your safety and comfort. Most of us won't go in for such danger, but we are all invited to the inconvenience of disrupting our comfortable and safe lives to do the right thing. Really, there are no innocent bystanders anymore, if that ever was a thing. We are the prophets now. We are the disciples. We have received the mantle, and we are vested in this inheritance. We are given the gifts that we need to witness to the good news of liberation and freedom and justice. The mantle of ministry rests on all of us. As with Elisha, it's an all or nothing inheritance. There's no room for half-hearted measures. No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom, he says. Each one of us here today, regardless of our particular role in the church, is part of this lineage. We are here because someone, or perhaps many someones, told us a story that compelled us, that called us to follow in the way of Christ. And it isn't guaranteed to be easy. So when you pray, go ahead, be sure you ask for that double portion of the Spirit. It is for us, for you. And I want to leave you with the blessing of Elijah. It's a poem by Jan Richardson. Make no mistake, this blessing that comes like hands laid upon your head, a mantle draped across your shoulders, you do not bear it alone. Think of it as lineage, as litany, an ancient legacy entwining you among the strands that weave through generations and centuries, that spiral with the enduring and determined grace of the story that has seized you and the one who has claimed you and called you. Take heart that this blessing comes to you singed and scorched and signed by the blazing of wonders you can barely imagine, and by trials that have already tested you, or you would not have found your way this far. Lay it down, and it will be a path for you across terrain that you would never imagine daring to cross. Take it up and know the presence of those who have passed this on to you, who encompass you, who enfold you, who go with you and release you into the keeping of the road that is your own and the one who has called your name. All thanks and praise to God. Amen.